All right. So here is my public app, and I thought everything was working. And this tiny little button completely torpedoed that assumption, right? It completely demolished the fact that my app was working the way it's supposed to work. So what's the problem here, right? This button does very trivial work, but it's good that I had this failure because it led me down the path to really go and try to fix this problem. And I'm going to walk you through those steps. So I'm going to cancel this, and let's go back to this app in Studio and look at the difference between the sweep functionality and the delete button functionality to clarify why this works, but this does not work, right? So I'm going to go back to apps, and I'm going to open this. This app is already open in Studio in edit mode. I'm going to go to the details page. If I go to the sweep button and look at the events and edit the rule, it invokes a background process, right? And it's called Watcher 2022 file sweep process. It's a background unattended process, and therefore it is able to run asynchronous and unattended. And then as input arguments to that process, I simply give it the number of files to delete. Remember, the number of files is coming from the dropdown. And once it does that, it gives me a notification saying, hey, look, the background process has received this command, and it is in the process of deleting your files. Check back later. You saw that earlier, right? The app already has the ability to create jobs in your folder, right? Because one of the roles that you have here, you see that? So it's able to create that job, and the job fires off. And now let us go back and look at the delete button, which is this button up top. Now, there is no right or wrong reason on why I built it this way, but what this button does is it does things in a hybrid manner. It still calls this queue. It posts an item to this queue. And when it posts this item to the queue, it triggers an automation that goes to the storage bucket and deletes the file, right? Once that file is deleted successfully, the app deletes the data service record that corresponds to that file directly from here using the entity operations, right? Here is the delete entity record operation. So what it does is it looks up my background entity, which is called twatcher 2022. It looks at the name of the file, which is equal to the image name, because the image in the storage bucket has the same name as the entity record, right? The name in the entity record. And once it is deleted, it will say that the entity record for this is deleted. Now, here's the problem. This is unstable. The reason is it is able to post items to the queue because it has the proper role to create items to the queue. Because if you go to the roles, you have given it the transaction permissions. See that? It can view the queue, and it can also create transactions, right? So that part of the functionality works, but this is an entirely different ballgame. This is a direct delete functionality or operation performed in the backend entity, and that is not going to work, right? Because if you go back to the documentation and look, there is no data service entity role defined here. So with that, I'm going to go over to the data service side of things, and we'll see how to fix this problem. Okay, so I am in data service of the same automation cloud instance where this app has been deployed. And these are my entities, and this is the entity in question. It's called twatcher 2022. Let's look at it quickly to understand what it holds. So very simple. It has an ID, a capture name, and rest of them are all standard fields. What's associated with the business is actually the capture name. And if I go to data, you can see that the file name is captured as a data service entity record. And you see the robot that's actually performing this is a service background robot, right? RBG support robot, right? One thing to note again is the name of the file that you see here is the name of the file in the storage bucket, right? So if I go back to the orchestrator, if I go to the storage bucket under this folder, and if I look at image files repository, you will see that the file nomenclature is the same as what's here. And therefore, we are able to delete the files between the storage bucket and the corresponding entity record in data service, right? That's how we are able to manage this. Now, by default, any entity, if you go into, come back to entities, and if you look at manage access, by default, every data service entity has got a role called everyone, and that everyone has been mapped to data reader, right? And if you go to the roles and see what the data reader is, it has only read permissions and view schema permissions, right? That's obvious because at minimum, you must be able to read the data service entity. But in public domain, you have to be careful, because if you are exposing your data service entity with this default everyone permission, it might read sensitive information that it is not, your app may be able to read sensitive information in the data service entity. But again, in my case, like I said, the information that I am exposing here in the app is very minimal, right? It's just the name of the image. And so I have let this everyone role be there, but the documentation says that we have to disable this and create custom roles, right? But my app still needs the ability to delete, right, data from my specific entity, right? And for that, we have to create a custom role, right? So if I go to create new role, right, and in the same nomenclature that I created the previous roles, I'm going to stick to the same naming conventions. I'm going to say public external app, and I'm going to say entity read delete, right? I'm just going to say 2 because I think I have a role that is already created. Now, you're not going to give it any kind of administrative permissions. So remember, this is an operational permission. This is not a management permission. So there's no administrative permissions. And you can see that the CRUD operations are grayed out because you have to add an entity before you can assign those permissions. So I'm going to click add entity. I'm going to select my entity, and that's this TWatcher 2022. So the moment I do that, you can see that it has got the read permissions, and that's because of this everyone role that has the data reader permission. Now I need the delete permission. So I enhance this role by creating delete. And now when you save it, you will see the listing in the roles section. Now I'm not going to save this because I already have a role that's been created. So I'm going to cancel out and I'm going to come back to roles. And here you can see that I've created a role, public external app, and it requires the read and delete permission to an entity. Now, creating the role does not mean it's been assigned, because if you look at the role here, the number of assignments is set to 0, right? So for that, we have to now assign this role. And then what I do is I go to assign roles, And here again, the naming convention of your app comes into play. Remember, your data service does not know this app with its user-friendly name. So if I do cam viewer, nothing shows up. But if I say UiPath apps, you can see that it shows up, right? So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to select my matching app, and I'm going to assign my public custom role for this app, and I'm going to say save. And once I did that and I hit refresh, you see that the number of assignments has changed from 0 to 1, which means that this custom role has been assigned to my public facing app, right? Now, we want to test the effectiveness of this, that it is really working. So what I do is I go back and just for completeness, I'm going to refresh this app. And I am going to take a latest image. I want to prove that this is working. So I select, let us say, the earliest image for 9/3. I'm going to copy the name of this image, go back to data service. I'm going to go to entities, go back here, data, and I'm going to make sure that this record exists. It does exist because you can see it in the app. So here it is. So that the record is available. Now I'm going to go back to my app, and this time I'm going to delete this image, right? Fingers crossed. I hope it works. You see, the image has been deleted. There is no error this time. Now going back to data service, I refresh and the image is gone, right? Similarly, if I go to storage bucket, remember, the app already has permissions to delete the files from storage bucket, but I want to make sure that this is working properly. I go to storage bucket and put in the name of the file. There is no result. So now you see that functionality that was unstable, because previously the app was deleting the file from storage bucket, but was failing to delete the record from data service, now has been fixed. It is deleting the data from the file from the storage bucket, and it's also deleting the corresponding record from the underlying data service entity. I want to quickly discuss a couple of things about public apps. I don't know if you have already observed, but in the previous section, we constrained the ability of the app to delete, the entity records from a specific entity, right? We created a custom rule where when I click this button, the app is able to delete the record from a very specific entity, right? If it tries to delete something from a different entity, even if it can view the records of that entity, it won't be able to delete it because of that custom rule. But if you're not observed already, you see the sweep button can delete records from any entity, right? Because the sweep button actually sends information down to the automation. The automation is run by a service robot, and the service robot has the ability to delete data from any data service entity. And I want to bring that into focus, because even if you've constrained your button completely to delete records from a specific entity, it still does not mean that you've covered all your bases, right? This is something that you might want to consider. So let's look at why that is, right? Why is it that my service robot is able to delete everything able to delete records from every data service entity, but this button has been constrained only to delete records from a specific entity? And you might want to fix that, right? Because you might want to constrain your robot to delete records from just that entity, right? I have not done that here. but it's something that you might want to look at. So let me go back to the orchestrator and go into tenant and go into folders. And if I go to the shared folder, you will see that there is this RVG support robot, right? This is a robot service account that's been added, and there is a video on the RPA Vanguard channel on how to set up service robots. Now, here you can see that I have granted the service robot the permission of automation user, and it is for this folder only, right? So if I edit this permission, if I edit this record, you will see that I've granted this robot automation user permission. But if you go back to manage access at the tenant level and look at your service robot, your service robot by default has the robot role. If you go into data service, and if I go to go back to default, if I go back to the home page, and if I go to manage access, and if you look at the automation user standard role or standard group, and look at the mapping of that role to data service, it is mapped to data writer. And if you want to look at the definition of data writer, you go in here, and if you click on the view icon, you can see that it has got complete read and write access for all entities, right? And that is why my service robot can not only delete records from the target entity that is related to this app, but it can do so for any other entity. Now you see the problem here, right? You might have constrained the button, but it is still possible for you to modify the app and send a delete request through the service robot and delete records from any other entity. So you might want to fix this, right? In which case, you might want to assign a different role for these, a custom role for the service robot for this app, right? And to do that, I've not done it, but this is how you might want to do this. You go to assign roles, and then you take your service robot. You see, this is the RVG service robot, and assign the same restricted permission that will allow the robot to delete information from just this targeted entity, right? So that your robot cannot go in and just delete whatever it wants to, right? Because now this app is open. So this is something that you might want to experiment with. I have not yet experimented with this. I will try to do this and run some tests. And if I have some updates, I will put it out there. But this is something that I thought that you must be concerned with when you are performing data service related operations from the public domain. The last thing that I wanted to talk about before we bring this video to an end is is how to deploy changes to your public domain app, right? You see this ugly rendition here, right? Now I want to remove this, right? I was experimenting with something and I don't want this visible. So I'm going to use this to publish changes to my app and demonstrate that here. So I have this label called current role. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to general. I don't want that visible. So I'm going to say hidden is equal to true. So I have saved it. And now I hit publish. So you can see that the previous version was 11 when we deployed this app in the orchestrator. The new version is 12, and there is an indication that this app is public. So I'm going to say right? This app has been published. Now you need to deploy it in the orchestrator. Now I'm going to hit deploy now. So it brings me to my last known location in the orchestrator. And then I go into processes and then go into apps. And here, because now you have deployed a new version, there is a difference. You see, the current deployed version is 11. Updates are available, right? So I'm going to go in here and say upgrade to latest version. Say upgrade. Now it's synced to the latest version. So I have version 12. What I'm going to do is, for better testing, I'm going to go back here, copy the URL, go back to my incognito page, open a new page, close this out, and hit this URL. So good. The ugly label that was there earlier has now been removed, right? Which proves that our app, the latest changes were factored into our newly packaged version 12, and those changes have been reflected in the newly deployed version 12 of the app, right? So this is how, if you want to deploy changes to your public app, this is the way of doing it. So that is all for this video, and I hope that you have enough knowledge now to take an app from a non-public domain to the public domain. And if you have followed this video, then I think that you will now have the confidence to start working on public apps, and also ascertain what are the implications of making an app public before you can deploy them to the public domain. If you have learned something new from this session, please do like and subscribe to my channel. I'll truly appreciate it. Thank you, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye.